Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's discussion on the role of European Parliament and European parties in fighting for LGBTI plus rights and people in countries like Slovakia and Slovakia specifically. My name is Barbara Zmušková. I'm an editor in Euractiv Slovakia, and we organized this discussion as we were following the way Slovakia's pre-election campaign, and especially its homophobic and transphobic parts, reverberated in European politics. And while the pro-Russian statements of the winning party Smer made a big splash, the anti-LGBTI plus statements of Smer and of Christian Democrats seem to be largely ignored. Obviously, since drafting our discussion, the European Socialists made the decision to suspend Smer's membership. So we can talk more about how that was influenced by their rhetoric on minority rights as well. So first, let me introduce our panelists. So I see that we have the Dutch MEP, Ms. Kim van Sparentak, with us. She is also the co-president of the LGBTI Intergroup in the European Parliament and a member of the Greens EFA party. Welcome. Then we also have Mr. Frederick Sauerstol, the president of the EPP-aligned LGBT Alliance. Welcome. We have Mr. Sebastian Pey, the vice president of Rainbow Rose, which is aligned with European Socialists. Welcome. And last but not least, we have, for the Slovak perspective, Mr. Martin Macko, executive director of our Inakost initiative. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you.
If you have any questions, in Slovakia, here we like to use their platform Slido. So you can just type in sli.do into your browser and use the hashtag Euractiv. Or if you're here in the Zoom with us, you can ask in the chat and I will see and I will ask. But to kick us off, I would like to ask Ms. Kateřina Boťová from the Heinrich Böll Stiftung office in Prague, without which this discussion couldn't take place, to say a few words to start.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank Barbara Zmušková and her colleagues for arranging this event, and of course, to our guest for taking time. We as Heinrich Böll Stiftung Prague have a long tradition in cooperating with Euractiv and Europolicy on various topics related to European policy. And when we were discussing how to continue this year, we felt it was necessary to focus more on the rights of LGBTQ plus people in Slovakia. So the question is, why is that? And I think we all have been observing very aggressive rhetoric against LGBTQ plus people from many corners of the Slovak political spectrum for some time now. Last week, we remembered the horrible terrorist attack and the murder of two queer people in Bratislava Bartepláreň. And what is most striking about it, while looking back on that event a year later, is the fact that there have been no major improvements in legislation or living conditions for LGBTQ plus people in Slovakia coming from the government since then. On the contrary, the hostile attitude and instrumentalization of queer people in political fight from significant part of political forces further intensifies. We are also witnessing this in the case of the new Slovak government, which is currently being formed. And today we are here to discuss this in context of broader European political groups, which can have certain opportunities to influence and engage with Slovak politics. And as Barbara already mentioned, we see that is already happening. Last week, the Party of European Socialists suspended Slovak members Smer and Hlas because of them building coalition with far right and because of their positions that simply contradict social democratic values, be it public comments on migration, Russian war against Ukraine, or be it comments also on LGBTQ plus people. In addition, I also would like to remind us of the infringement procedure against Hungary following the adoption of so-called anti-LGBT law. And in my opinion, good experience in this case was the successful advocacy efforts of Hungarian as well as European civil society organizations aimed at moving forward this lawsuit. So these examples show us some ways how we can engage in European-wide networks, and we need to find effective ways how to use them. And last remark I'd like to make when talking about LGBTQ people is about intersectional approach, because I'm convinced that we must not tackle this issue isolated from the others. And it would be a big mistake to address any inequality and discrimination of one group without thinking of other groups in society, such as socially disadvantaged groups or ethnic minorities, especially Roma community, or refugees and migrants, without reflecting on how their struggles intersect. If we don't do that, our help will be failing. And I also strongly believe that we always have to make clear that this fight is never only about queer people. It is about securing fundamental human rights and human dignity in general. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Katarzyna. So let's dive right in. So I want to ask about the situation in the European Socialists. The Party of European Socialists did not particularly or explicitly say that one of the reasons was the anti-LGBTI rhetoric, but the group in the European Parliament did mention it among one of the reasons. So Mr. Pei, I understand you cannot speak for the European Socialists, but you are the vice president of the Rainbow Rose, the LGBT organization of the socialists. So maybe from your point of view, how big was this the reason, and do you follow in time what all of the member states are saying on LGBTI issues?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for organizing the discussion and having us all. I think it's very important that we also discuss from a European perspective of how we can influence and help the community in the different states, in the different challenges we are facing. You mentioned already the group in the European Parliament mentioned queer rights as one of the reasons why the suspension happened. I can say, as Rainbow Rose, we are the umbrella organization of all the socialist, labor, social democratic, LGBTIQ organizations in the different member parties all over Europe, also bringing together activists. And from a second perspective, I'm at the moment sitting in Vienna, like 50 kilometers away from Bratislava. Of course, we are deeply connected to activists and people from Slovakia coming to Vienna, coming to Austria. I think there's also a historical connection there that we are quite aware of. And I think we have seen over the last decade, but also especially over the last years since the corona pandemic, a backlash in many European countries against human rights and especially against queer rights, and we are following that and discussing that very closely, I think, within the sister parties as well as on the European level. Also, the case already mentioned in Hungary has to a certain extent brought forward the importance of the attacks of queer people as one of the central perspectives in this backlash. So I think the European level is quite important when dealing with how we support LGBTIQ persons in the different countries. It's always, of course, a balance. Suspending the membership of two parties in Slovakia is a big step for our party, for our political family, especially. That also, to a certain extent, robs us of the possibility to influence these parties. And I think the question that all of us working in European networks have to answer is when is the possibility of effectively helping people on the ground and supporting and creating pressure and raising awareness, when is it not given anymore, and when are the common values that bring together a political party on many different topics? The pro-Russia stance was mentioned. Other kinds of discriminations were mentioned already. When does it not work anymore to be part of a political family? Just as one concrete example, the Party of European Socialists, together with the S&D Group, I think 10 years ago now, 8 years ago, agreed on the what we call the Rainbow Roadmap, and stands of core values that all of our political parties have to abide by. Of course, there are different starting points in different countries, but that is one of the central decisions we all agreed on, and that was not given in Slovakia anymore. We have been discussing that for quite a while now. I think there were hopes going together with the election of a new progressive alliance, that, as it seems now in Slovakia, did not happen. So, out from our perspective as well, even though we gonna try even more to get together with civil society, with different activists, also within the parties who still want to change something, the institutionalized cooperation at the moment is not possible, neither with Smer nor with LAS anymore.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So, Ms. von Sparentak, since we have you here only for the first 30 minutes, I saw that the Greens were among one of the voices that were trying to push on the European Socialists to suspend Smer. So why did you feel it was appropriate for a different political party to step in this moment?
Well, I think it's very important that we continue to stand united as progressive forces, that we continue to stand united as democratic forces, and that we don't let this kind of hateful ideologies infiltrate in the progressive forces. And I think that's why it's extremely important that we also keep checks on each other. If we see that one of our parties is backsliding in a direction that goes against our progressive values. So that's why I think this conversation has been had, and I'm very happy also that this decision has been made, because we see that there is a massive backsliding everywhere. We see that there's a lot of anti-LGBTI propaganda pushed everywhere. We're seeing that it's becoming more difficult to keep strong on these issues. But if we don't do it now, then it will only get worse. So I think it's very important that we stand united for LGBTI rights, human rights in general, and for democracy and for progressive values in Europe.
Thank you. So maybe for the Slovak perspective, Mr. Macko, I feel like maybe in Slovakia we knew it for a few years that, especially, for example, in a progressive alliance of social democrats, that Smer did not really belong. So do you think, and there obviously is also a question of whether Smer now will possibly be even more unhinged, more radicalized. So do you welcome the decision by the European Socialists, and do you think it came in an appropriate time?
Well, yes. We started, for the first time we started discussion with European Socialists and also Rainbow Rose in 2014, because that time Smer and Christian Democrats adopted the amendment of Constitution about the definition of marriage as a union between one man and one woman. And it was, I think, really interesting experience for us. It looked really hopeful that time, because Smer and also especially Robert Fico made some promises about the policies towards LGBT people in Slovakia, but at the end nothing was done. And the problem from my perspective was that there was no follow-up, no evaluation of this process, so no sanctions and so on. And now I think this approach of like discussions and so on, it's not helpful basically now. So I think this was the only possible option for them, basically, to distance themselves from this party. Yeah.
Thank you. So you mentioned also the Christian Democrats. So let's move over to the European People's Party for now. There was the EPP-aligned Christian Democrat Party made sort of waves when its leader went on TV to call LGBTI ideology, but also to call LGBTI ideology a scourge, or you can translate it also as the plague, and said that it is just as bad as corruption. So Mr. Sauvestal, I want to ask, you are the leader of an LGBTI alliance in the EPP, which wants to convince other EPP parties to respect LGBT rights. So I want to know how it's going and what are the processes. But do you have some sort of an equivalent to this sort of rainbow roadmap that I heard from Mr. Pei, or whether this is an issue that divides the European people's parties and they have sort of a carte blanche on this issue?
Thank you. I mean, first of all, happy to be invited. The European Centre-Right LGBT Plus Alliance has been around for 10 years, and we've been, of course, in close cooperation with the EPP family all these years. Well, it was actually this year that we've had the pleasure of having an official status within the political family. This is the processes in the different parties are, of course, different from each other. So, and interesting enough, when they voted on giving us an official status as an associated entity of the EPP, the only one voting against was Slovakia.
Sorry, when was this? Which year was this?
This was in February in Helsinki. So the only one voting against was Slovakia, which I think clearly shows that Slovakia is a problem by itself more than others. I mean, we have a history, of course, of the parties in the EPP family being further apart than in many other political families when it comes to a lot of issues. I mean, there is a great difference between a political party like the moderate one that I belong to in Sweden, which is quite liberal, and some very, very conservative parties on the other end. Or very Christian Democrat parties at the other end. So, I mean, we are a very big group, the biggest by far, and it's a lot of political parties. And interesting enough is that most of them at least realize it's important that we as a political family are open for many ideas and open for a broad perspective of voters and a broad perspective of policies. And I mean, historically, we've had problems with the Hungarians, and as you all know, Fidesz was, in the end, they left the day before they were supposed to be voted out. And of course, from the Swedish perspective, the Northern European perspective, and many other countries, we worked hard for that for several years. But I think it's the same like with the Social Democrat family. It is a very, very high threshold before you kick someone out of a group, because you don't want to give up that last hope of influencing them. So when it comes to what we do, we are currently working on what could be described as a rainbow map, since we are adopting a new policy strategy for the alliance at our upcoming annual meeting in Dublin next month. And this is something that we will use in the conversations with not only the EPP, but also with all the different member parties when we have an opportunity, and all the other side organizations in the group as well. And of course, we will raise the issue about Slovakia again. And like we raised the issue about Italy and the actions of the Italian government, which of course is also contains one EPP party, although there's one better one outside of the government. But we raised that issue. You cannot act like this and pretend there's nothing going on if you're taking away rights from people. And the same goes for Slovakia, same goes for many other countries. And we will keep having that conversation.
That is very interesting to me. I think I didn't even realize to what extent Slovakia was isolated. I just Googled that the EPP has 83 parties, and for Slovakia to be the only one to go to vote against your organization becoming aligned, that is maybe it shouldn't be, but it is a little bit shocking to me. But back to Ms. van Sparrentak, while we have you here for the last few minutes. So the European Parliament or the European Union in general doesn't have that many rights and competencies in this right. But you are, so maybe if you could talk for a little bit as a president of the LGBTI intergroup in the European Parliament, what is something that you are working on, and how do you see European Parliament working or bettering the rights of queer people in Europe?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think, I mean, indeed, we don't decide what the exact rights for LGBTI people are in the specific member states. However, I think we are currently showing, especially with the infringement procedure in Hungary that was already mentioned before, that, you know, we do want to protect fundamental rights for everyone, including the LGBTI community as EU. And that's why I'm really happy also that that was one of the basis for the infringement procedure to Hungary, and that many, many member states also supported that. And of course, also the European Parliament. What in terms of what we can do as European Parliament is quite broad. Of course, we can set points on the agenda. So we really, as soon as things go wrong in the member state, we can ask for a debate, we can ask for conversations with the Commission and make sure that they, you know, keep an eye on what is happening, and also are standby in case things go truly wrong, that they can start an infringement procedure or take other steps. So that is one of the important things. But I think one of the most valuable things that we do and that I experience in my role as co-president of the LGBTI intergroup is the extra layer of protection that we are giving to LGBTI people. The people who live in member states where their rights are being taken away, where their government is scapegoating them, where their government is pushing them aside as just another political tool that they might be able to win an election with. Having a layer above that, where there are politicians who are saying, we hear you, we want to fight for your rights, we want to protect your rights, and we want to further your rights, even despite the fact that that doesn't look like that is going to happen in your own member states. That is something that is extremely important, and that we do with a lot of confidence in the European Parliament. So I think it's extremely important what we do. If I hear, you know, activists from everywhere in Europe, they look at us. Because also, for example, if you look not only what's happening in Slovakia, but also what is happening in Italy now, activists come to us and say, help us to not, you know, go in the same direction as Hungary. So I think it's extremely vital that there's this extra layer that stands for human rights, and that also doesn't see human rights as a, you know, pick and choose menu, but it's, you know, it's a set menu that you have to adhere to all human rights. So more on the specific work that we do is, for example, working on mutual recognition of parenthood, and this is ensuring that you know, parents and families who are a family in one member state can also be recognized as family in another member state. Other work that we work on is the directive on gender-based violence, and ensuring that intersex rights are recognized there, ensuring that trans rights will be included there. And I think it's extremely important that there is a voice that tries to ensure that minority rights are also seen, that specific legislation is pushed for, you know, when it comes to rainbow families, but also that when there's other legislation that we are working on in the European Parliament, that there's a very clear voice, a very strong voice of a very big group of MEPs that are saying, this is the direction we're going, we are choosing human rights, we are choosing for LGBTI rights. And I think that is extremely important. So officially, not that many competences, but absolutely crucial that we work on these issues. And in some respects, especially when it comes to, you know, things between member states, we do actually have competences as the EU.
Yes, thank you very much. So I think we have sort of agreed that this sort of soft power or an international standing of a party or a member state can have influence. So I want to ask Mr. Macko, I was kind of surprised that there wasn't a larger international reaction to the 1-year anniversary of the terrorist attack in front of Čeplareň. I expected more maybe European Union or Commission officials or even heads of states to make sort of statements. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the reaction sort of limited to Czech Republic. So I want to ask whether whether you maybe felt the same way, or do you think maybe it was overshadowed by what's happening elsewhere in the world, and whether you think you could use just more sort of this soft power support from abroad?
Well, the international community and European community showed huge solidarity and support during the year after this terrorist attack. Many head of states made visits to this place where the terrorist attacks was done. But yeah, now it's kind of natural that there are like bigger problems in the world and so on. But for us, it's important that international audience or also European community pay attention to Slovakia because this was problem for years, because Slovakia on the surface looks not so bad, let's say, in these issues, but also this terrorist attack showed that we have like huge problem within the Slovak society and especially politics, and especially now with this new government, we will need huge also international support, attention to what is this new government doing and so on, and also pressure. So it will be more important than it is now, basically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I want to ask one thing that I'm wondering about, maybe back again to Mr. Pei. So the interesting thing I think about the Smer's rhetoric was that they seem to, in one video that I saw, they actually made a red line between LGB and T, and even in the most recent video of Robert Fico, he said that he respects the gays and the lesbians, but he's very much against gender ideology being taught in school, which I think follows the trends of this anti-LGBT rhetoric abroad in America or in the Great Britain. But I wonder whether it maybe for other heads of state or for people who are not in this queer activism area, whether it fuddles the debate and whether it's maybe more difficult for people to recognize this as homophobia, or whether that complicated the entire discussion around Smer.
I think, first of all, I don't think we have to reiterate it. Statements like that are unacceptable in any way. But it's a broader trend we are seeing at the moment. It's a trend from the US, as you already mentioned. We're seeing it in Hungary, and we have to be honest to ourselves. We're seeing the rise of transphobia as a political weapon, and to a certain extent also as a political trap that different groups strap into all over Europe and all over most political parties. I think we all have to be very clear and very certain about where this discourse is coming up in Western Europe, in Northern Europe, in Central Europe. I've seen it in also in my political family, even though thankfully we can keep it under control. But I think we have to be honest about that to tackle it. The rise of the movement against gender ideology, or what other crap they are calling it. We all know that's warmed up homophobia from the 1980s. We know the storylines, we know the points, and we know who they are targeting. And to create a certain distinction between the normal gays and lesbians and everything outside that, everything, every person on a gender spectrum is certainly used to divide us. It's used to divide especially those who want to have a strong civil society. It's created to divide feminist movements. And I think we have to tackle that all over Europe. The important thing, I guess, is not going into the political trap that certain players want to set for us, but also as even though we might be divided on certain other political issues in our political families, to have first of all a clear stance on human rights, and that we cannot allow the queer movement to be separated on a distinction like that. And second of all, to find a counter narrative that works against that fear mongering that goes along with transphobia at the moment. And just to reiterate it, I think that's a problem we have everywhere at the moment. But to do it in that way, that open and that, to be honest, disgusting way is totally unacceptable.
Thank you. So maybe to go back to Slovakia, Mr. Macko mentioned that especially now with Smer in government, that things will probably get worse. So since we already do have in our constitution that marriage is, for example, between a woman and a man, so do you think that, what steps do you fear that they will attempt to make while in the government? So what can the international community expect, or know what to expect from Smer?
Yeah, I think what they will do, like immediately, it's to stop any public funding for LGBTI projects, for example, in culture, or also some social and educational projects. So this is kind of easy for them. And then it is already mentioned in this common memorandum what they signed in few days ago, that they will somehow to fight with this gender ideology in schools. So we expected some law or some internal measures within the educational systems to prevent any discussions about LGBT issues or any involvement of NGOs which have some activities or trainings about LGBT issues and so on. And of course, the biggest fear is that they will achieve somehow to amendment the constitution, because not only these three parties are willing to somehow limit the rights of LGBT people, but also the opposition parties like Christian Democrats and Olano Party. And this is like big problem for us because they have constitutional majority. So this is like opportunity for Fico to somehow amend the constitution. Of course, his main goal is to somehow to limit independence of judiciary and to somehow change the judges in constitutional court and so on, but he will use this issue of basically LGBT people to manage to achieve this, and we are afraid that they will adopt something similar than in Hungary, so to like new definition of parenthood or something like that the biological sex is the same during the whole life, so there is no possibility of administrative change of gender and so on. They have like more opinions and possibilities to do something. So yeah, this is the biggest fear.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned that the government could attempt to find help or cooperate with the Christian Democrats when trying to change the constitution. So back to the EPP, Mr. Sauerstal, you said that obviously there is a very long road before a party can be suspended, or for example, when it obviously took a while for the European Socialists, but as well it took a while for Orban. But if the Christian Democrats, for example, example, cooperate on such a constitutional amendment, which would obviously go against LGBTI rights. Do you think that this could start or speed the process that could eventually end up in some sort of ramifications for the Christian Democrats in Slovakia?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I think that would be probably a step that is not seen as okay. I mean, we always in every political family we have to respect that different political parties are at different places in history, or if you want to look at it like a timeline. Of course, it is. In countries where we worked with these issues for a much longer time, the more political parties will be more progressive when it comes to issues like LGBT or gender equality or other kinds of freedoms. And but that's one thing, saying, okay, we're not there yet, we are moving slowly, or we are starting. But if you go in the other direction, totally, I mean, you turn around and say, okay, we're not just going to say live and let live, we're going to go in the other direction. That will of course make it more serious, and that is definitely a step towards having a real conversation and a real discussion on whether political parties can be a member of our political family, because a constitutional ban, as you mentioned, would be not only stupid, but also against the values that our political family is actually based on. I mean, we are the party for freedom and for people to be able to live their lives, create families, and prosper. And just to mention, I mean, look, we had an election in Poland on Sunday. Things are looking up there. We shouldn't just give up just because it's not very positive in Slovakia right now. Things can turn around, and I mean, if you look at the possible coalition government under the leadership of former EPP president and of course former EU president as well, Donald Tusk, there will be change even when it comes to these issues. The backlash will stop, and maybe there will be movement in the right direction in Poland. So I mean, we should never give up. There is hope, and we can together do whatever we can to influence this development.
Maybe just a follow-up question to stay with the EPP for a while now. Maybe I'm a little surprised to hear from you how it seems that LGBT, the respect for LGBT people and for personal freedoms is enshrined in the EPP. Maybe just with the experience with the Christian Democrats here, I felt that, especially with Christian Democratic parties, that there would be more of a question towards that. So maybe my question to you is, and you obviously are not a politician, or you are not in the leadership of the EPP, but do you think the parties, the European People's Parties of all different countries, have these conversations with each other? Can they influence each other? And maybe even particularly about how the Slovak Christian Democrats have their own specific definition of what Christian values are and how they're understood in different countries. And do you think that they can influence them? Because right now it seems that they're pretty much set on this path, and that any sort of change seems impossible.
Well, I'm not gonna say whether the Slovak Christian Democrats can be changed or not, because I don't know that. But the thing is, we can from the outside, of course, have a conversation and try to influence them. I mean, as I said in the beginning, the DPP is, in many senses, the broadest political family in Europe. I mean, we have parties who call themselves Christian Democrats, and we have parties who call themselves conservatives or liberal conservatives. And I think there are a huge difference between parties in different parts of Europe in this family. But also, I think there is a problem with when you call yourself a Christian Democrat, what do you mean by that? Do you mean the ideology? Or do you mean we are Christians in the sense of let's put religion at the forefront? Because those two are different. The Christian Democrat ideology that many parties in our family adhere to, like the CDU in Germany or CDA in the Netherlands, CDV in Belgium, etc., isn't the same kind of Christian Democrat that you might see in some other parties named that. that goes the other way around, with the religious perspective being more important, because the ideology is way more about families and values of being open-minded, being free, and creating a society where we are less dependent on the state or on the government than it is saying, the Bible says something. If you get that difference. And then you have the entire group of conservative parties, is like half the EPP, the Nordic parties, the Southern European parties, etc., that have another way of going into politics and looking upon politics, which is definitely based on the individual is number one, and we are building everything to create freedom. And that means you have to roll back. And I think, I was talking about Donald Tusk, and he said in a speech a few years back when he was EPP president that if you tolerate homophobia and nationalism and so on, you're not a Christian Democrat. If you place the state and the nation above the freedom and dignity of individual, you're not a Christian Democrat. And to quote David Cameron, even though he's a big failure with Brexit and everything, he said, I'm in favor of gay marriage because I'm a conservative, not although I'm a conservative, because we want to create freedom for families and for individuals. So I think these are the discussions we need to keep having and keep reminding people about to step by step erode the sort of the walls set up by parties and people who haven't had these discussions or haven't had this sort of transformation ideologically over the years. But even with that, as I said, there is a border you can't cross, and maybe Slovakia is very close to that one right now.
Yes, thank you very much. Very, very interesting position that definitions of Christian democratic values that maybe they're not very used to hearing in Slovakia. So, Mr. Pei, we have one other question from our audience already. And that is, Mr. Matsko mentioned that the possibilities for funding for LGBT organizations from the state will probably become much more limited. And you also mentioned that now that you have suspended SMER and HLAS, that you have plans to sort of cooperate more with the civil society. So maybe if you can talk about some of those plans that you have now.
We, of course, are in the middle of developments that are still going on. The common memorandum that was already signed by the parties was mentioned. I think we also have to see what the government is going to do as soon as it stands as it is. But I think what is clear should be clear for all of us is definitely clear for Rainbow Rose and also for the Party of European Socialists. Is that we need to focus on the civil society now more than ever, create better connections, reach out to organizations like Innercost, for example. I take that both on the European level, but also for me, as I said earlier, on the Austrian level. With Austrian Social Democratic Party, with the NGOs we are working together with here in Vienna and all over Austria. Supporting the community in Slovakia is going to be one of the key international targets. And I think that can not only be political pressure, that can also be shown solidarity. As was already mentioned by the colleague from the Greens before, we have a good tradition of visiting Budapest, visiting Hungary. Especially facing the current backlash under the Orban regime there. We made it a habit of coming with members of European Parliament, with national politicians, with fundraising for the NGOs there. And I think that is exactly the way we have to go on regarding Slovakia at the moment. And I think that's the big to-do for us over the next weeks to create new routes of engagement with the civil society there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question that we have is for Innercost and what steps it's planning to do now to minimize hate speech, but maybe more broadly to protect or try to protect. Obviously, you cannot do everything yourself, but in a country that will probably now be very, very antagonistic to all kinds of minority rights, and maybe whether you are now maybe more in connection with some NGOs in Hungary or in Poland that were in a similar situation for the past few years.
Well, firstly, we want to continue with our activities. We want to focus on community. We now trying to build like a new community center in Bratislava. So we want to provide some legal, psychological, and social help to the community. This should be done next year, because we already have support from city of Bratislava and Bratislava region, and also we will focus more on strategic litigation. So we are trying to change the situation through courts and court cases. Of course, we need to, and we will build like bigger coalitions, also with other NGOs, which are more focused, for example, on rule of law, or also environment, because this will be also issue with this government. And we will be part of this bigger coalition, and we will try to somehow prevent the worst changes. And also, we want to more cooperate with international organization and organization in countries like Poland or Hungary, because they have much more experience with this. I think especially Polish example is interesting for us, because like one really inspirational experience is this situation around LGBT-free zones, and they achieve, like, it was of course the common effort of NGOs, civil society, media, and also European Parliament to pressure to the European Commission, and at last the European Commission said that those regions which adopted this kind of policy would not be eligible for EU funding. And this is also, I think, the way for Slovakia, because we are really dependent on European money. Basically, all public investments in Slovakia are based on European funds. So this will be really useful tool for how to influence Slovak government.
Yes, that will be very interesting to see how the European Commission approaches. It has much more mechanisms that it had a few years ago now to block EU funds in a country which is antagonistic to the rule of law. One thing that I think is interesting now that I think about our conversation, that we keep mentioning how important the civic society is now, and how in an absence of state funding, the international community will have to step in. And one of the things that Robert Fico is now mentioning, or even just yesterday when signing the coalition agreement, he said that he wants to now enact some sort of a Hungarian or Russian style foreign agent law, that for every, he even said that the rule of NGOs is over now, and that every NGO that it gets foreign funding will have to be labeled a foreign agent. So it seems that he really knows that this is the only avenue for the civic society or for minority rights right now, and he very much knows where to strike next. But I want to talk maybe about, you mentioned the legal avenues, and it was already mentioned here that the European Commission sued Hungary for its homophobic law, and the Court of Human Rights will be deciding for the first time about whether this breached European values as in and of themselves. and they will have to decide whether one of the fundamental human or EU values is a protection of LGBT rights, and whether, for example, Hungary can be sanctioned just because it enacted this homophobic law, even though it doesn't breach any sort of other EU directive, for example. So obviously we don't have a crystal ball. We're also not lawyers, but I just want to know, what do you think that the result of this court case will be? Maybe start with Mr. Pei.
Normally, court cases is always a bit of a difficult undertaking. I think given the support from not only the European level, but from the different member states, and also the legislation on the European level, the jurisprudence on the European level over the last years, I think we have a good chance that's going to be an important precedence of how European values can also be implemented through funding. So I think we will have a good outcome. I hope for it, of course, but I think we should see a real shift both in legislation and in the courts over the last 10, especially the last 4 years, when it comes to recognizing LGBTIQ and queer issues as human rights issues that are also protected under European law and other European institutions.
Thank you, Mr. Savas. So would this be good news for the EPP as well? Because as you mentioned, you're a very broad coalition of many different parties which are in a different timeline. So if the European Union now explicitly said that LGBT rights are EU rights and that any sort of laws that go against them would result in sanctions, I imagined that maybe more member states would have a problem with that.
I mean, I think that Ms. Pei is right that going to court is always taking a chance, but if it turns out the right way, that would be a very good step forward. And not just from, like, oh, that's great for the EPP family, it solves one of our problems, but it solves real problems for real people in the real world. I mean, it solves problems for LGBT people wherever they live in Europe. And the thing is, I thought you said that would make LGBT rights EU rights, but I would say that LGBT rights are already human rights. So why should we divide? But if we need a court to tell people that, well, go for it. And hopefully they will say that. And that will be a very powerful tool for all of us to use. I mean, I think I've said this in speeches many times in Swedish Parliament and in other stages and even in the DPP family. I mean, LGBT rights are human rights. There are no ifs, there are no buts, and there are no maybes, because you cannot have half the cake in this case. And I also realized too, the discussion we had earlier on transphobia, when someone says, yeah, well, I have no problem with the LNG and the B, but the T, that's a big problem. But it shouldn't be, because, I mean, this is... And the worst with that debate is that, hey, we imported this from Donald Trump to Europe. We imported this from the US, an issue we did not need to have here because we had already sorted that out. And also it is despicable to see that the people who are against the trans people are hiding behind women saying we are doing this to protect women. I think that's kind of despicable. And sadly, you can hear that from political parties and politicians from all over the scale. I think this is a battle that we really need to keep focusing on, not only in Slovakia, but in so many other countries, including the country Sweden, where I live.
Yes, it is. I do agree that Europe did not need to have this important from America, unfortunately. So we have an interesting question about what are our expectations from the EU elections. I think there is some sort of fear that the far right will become much more strengthened and that some of its ideas will become mainstreamed into the larger European groups. The European Union or the European Commission that we had now was sort of more forward-thinking for LGBT rights as well. Even try to push the envelope a little bit further with the cross-border parenthood recognition, even though it would need consent from all member states, which means it's probably not going to pass through Hungary. So maybe just thinking further for Europe, do you think we are moving towards this sort of backsliding back into far right? Do you think we will see that in European election? Or maybe first for Mr. Macko, what do you think the European elections will be now for in Slovakia? Do you think we'll have maybe even more progressive candidates, and they will be able to be sort of a opposition to the government?
Yeah, I'm a little bit optimistic about the European election, also presidential election next year, because the pro-European part of the voters will be more, they will be more motivated to show up in the election and so on. So yeah, but definitely that there will be successful far-right candidates also from Slovakia and so on. But yeah, I think after the first steps of this new government, the pro-European majority, I would say, in Slovakia will be more motivated to vote, basically.
Yeah, that is an optimistic take, and I think it is Slovakia would need it for sure, because current government that is antagonistic to minority rights in tandem with a president that would also have similar stances would be a very dangerous combination to have for the next 4 years. So that I absolutely agree that the presidential election is something to watch in Slovakia. But back to the European level, EU elections and the new commission. Do you, Mr. Saurastal, do you have confidence that the next European Commission will fight for LGBTI rights?
Well, yes, I am confident because I'm confident that the elections will end in I mean, the normal political parties and families actually maintaining the position as the largest groups. I think that if you look at how we run the European Commission, how you run the European Parliament, etc. today, I think that works, and I think that we'll keep working like that. And if you look at the Commission of Ursula von der Leyen, we have the first commissioner who's very into the LGBT agenda with the first ever EU LGBTIQ strategy, and that's Helena Dalli, Social Democrat from Malta. She's a very good person. I hope that she or someone else will get that role and portfolio in the next commission as well. There are much more to be done with that strategy and the agenda, but at least there's been a start, and that is a good step forward. And I'm myself on the list for the European election, although I'm on the last place on my party list. So I need a miracle to be elected, but I hope to be that we will all have successes for good parties. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the election in Poland, one of the key factors in ousting the PIS government is, of course, the turnout, the voter turnout. And I know, for instance, Slovakia has a very low voter turnout, and maybe that's an issue that we need to address broadly. How will we get voter turnout up? How will we get young voters out and make to create a positive development?
Thank you. It's interesting to hear that other countries are already putting up the candidate list for the EU elections. It's unfortunately not the case in Slovakia just now. But Mr. Prey, do you share this optimism for an LGBTI friendly or respectful commission in Parliament?
I think it's a good sign for European politics if the Socialists and the People's Party are quite on the same page when it comes to that. I just want to look back 5 years ago in 2018, 2019. I think most people weren't that optimistic about the perspectives. And even after the election starts, we were not that optimistic, even though as you said, normal forces, the democratic forces won and worked together against especially the far right. and we got one of the most consequential commissions, not only Helena Dalli, but also a lot of other commissioners who worked on the topic. And I'm quite optimistic if we work together in the democratic field, if we work together, especially across borders, to use all our resources to support each other, support civil society, and turn out as many people who support a good solidarity vision of Europe, then we can work or build on what was achieved during this commission. And as you said already, there's a lot more to be done. We have not even talked about the anti-discrimination directive that is still missing on the European level. And I think we can achieve that. I'm quite optimistic, but it's going to be a lot of work.
Yes, thank you. I just want to remind for everyone that if you have any more questions, at this point we have answered the one that we have gotten so far, but we still have 30 minutes. We're absolutely ready to get more questions. You can either ask them if you're here in the Zoom with us in the chat, or you can use the Slido platform with the hashtag Euractiv. And the questions we got so far are very interesting, so I'm excited about getting more. Let's so right now there are 6 EU member states, Slovakia being one of them, which don't have any legal recognition of same-sex couples. And according to very recent the Human Rights Court decision, this goes against human rights. It was a court proceeding with Russia, which obviously again sort of paints the picture of where is the more of modern Western approach here. So it has been already a while, and am I wrong that we didn't really see much of a reaction in these countries, that they don't really feel as shamed or influenced by this decision? So Mr. Matko, it obviously will probably not shame Smer as well, but is it at least a sign for the international community that this is something that they can no longer ignore, that this is a human rights issue?
No, well, yes, but. And sorry, what was the question?
I just wanted to ask about why do you think it didn't do more? Because I think to hear from such a huge organization that this is a breach of human rights, it seemed to me like there was at least hope of this doing something, of countries paying attention, realizing that they're in the wrong side of history. And I didn't think we hear any of that. So maybe just your opinion, why it didn't do anything?
Well, I think it's also an issue that parties, and it's not only the case of Smer, but also other parties are doing like different policy at the European level and the national. It's especially visible with Smer because the representatives of Smer in European Parliament are voting for basically everything which is promoting rights of LGBT people and so on, but on national level they're doing quite opposite. And actually this is also I think one of the reasons why the European parties didn't basically do like more strict actions against them because they have already their support in the European Parliament. So I think it's more important to pay attention what is happening on the national level, not only in the European Parliament. And this is like clear example of how important it is.
Yes, thank you. That is a very good point that I actually still want to ask. Maybe to Mr. Pei first, it was surprising to me to what extent the Smer MEPs were supporting LGBT rights. They said it's obvious that they are human rights. There's no reason for them not to get some sort of like legal recognition for same-sex couples, but also for parenthood, which is a very, very progressive position. So how did you look at Smer? Because I think the MEP Katarina Rod-Nevedělová was sort of the spokesperson at the party level. So when you hear something different from a representative in an international setting, from MEPs, and then you have something very different on the national level, how do you balance those competing positions?
I think that brings us back to the core question we were discussing in the beginning of what political parties are for in the end. Mr. Marco already mentioned a very important point of the different acting, not only the different talk, but also the different acting on a European level and on a national level, and the lack of awareness for that. I think that's why strong civil society connections are so important. So that every person responsible, every person working on certain issues, for example, the LGBTIQ issue, knows when something is going wrong in a member state, and we can create pressure on that. I think we all have to be honest as well, working in a political organization, what you say to the outside and what you have, what discussions you have on the inside, are not always the same. So I think what we are doing, and Slovakia is not the only example in that case, where we are working on together with our MEPs, together with certain member states, is to seek the discussion and raise exactly the issue. What you're saying and how you're working on the European level, for example, differs from that what you're doing in the government or what you're saying on the national level. And of course, we are all in a political spectrum, and all political parties in itself are spectrum. We have a tendency to have individuals with huge awareness for human rights on the European level more than we have them on the national level. At least I can say that, I think, for my political family. And then the question becomes, how do you support them? How do you support them through international pressure to influence their home party? If that's not the case, and if it's obvious that there cannot be that much influence, that you stay within the spectrum of your political family as a national party, then you have to do the consequences, as the socialists did last week. And then we need other ways, as we already discussed, with working together. But I think the key point is awareness on what's happening on the national levels, and I think discussions like today are quite good also to keep that discourse open.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. For Mr. Saustol, I think maybe it's an advantage that the Christian Democrats are at least saying the same thing on the international level as they're on the national level. So at least there's more transparency in that. But do you have maybe issues in other member states and other parties where there is a distinction between the European rhetoric and then what happens on the national level?
You're absolutely right that when it comes to the Slovak Christian Democrats, they are not speaking with a split tongue. They're speaking the same language everywhere, which is a problem. We need to keep addressing that from now on. I agree that I mean, it is not uncommon for political parties to have different people saying different things or on different levels. I mean, we are. Many of the parties in the EPP family, many of the parties in the Social Democrat families are very, very large political parties that are a huge amount of voters. And of course, that means you have a lot of politicians, you have a lot of elected people who might interpret your decisions or your ideology or your values differently. And I think that is a real problem, but it's also a problem that is harder to address from the European level than from the national level. I think that needs to be bottom up. And even if it's like you said that the more progressive person or the more insightful person is in Europe, the problem is that person needs to make sure you have this connection. And I think this is more important to tackle in a in an organized way, where you don't want to sit in Brussels and say, yeah, what you need to say and think and so on. You need to go to the cities, go to the countries, go to the parties and have the discussion there. How do you convince the local municipal elected officials in somewhere in Slovakia I don't even know exists, that we are on the right track and this is the right thing to do and this is how you're going to go about it. That's how you create that change. I think we need to keep doing things like that. Sort of say that actually I realized Bratislava is the only EU capital I've never been to, so I need to become more of an expert on Slovakia apparently. So I can maybe go there myself and meet the Christian Democrats, more of them, not only the person who turns up at the meetings in Brussels and doesn't want to talk to us.
It could be definitely interesting if they're the only ones that are clearly diverging, that maybe it is worth paying a visit. So one question that we have, which is maybe more technical towards EU's competencies, but if it's interesting to our audience, I think we can definitely try to answer it. And that is the issue of conditionality of EU funds. And as it sort of plays in connection with LGBT rights. So right now, we know that Poland and Hungary have blocked access to their recovery fund. Hungary to theirs a portion, I think a fifth of their EU funds, but it's quite complicated. One is connection to the fact that they're not appropriately protecting the EU funds from corruption. And then with the recovery funds, it is sort of more broader, connected to judiciary. But there still isn't a clear, we speak here and we agree that LGBT rights are human rights, but there isn't a clear mechanism right now, or it hasn't been used in this way, that a country such as Slovakia, who is in breach of human rights according to the latest Human Rights Court ruling, because it doesn't have any legal recognition, but it is not being punished for it by the European Union in a way that it would have blocked funds. And that is in part issue of EU competencies, but in part also sort of a political decision, because there's always different approaches to how you use the tools that you have. So maybe do you think that for the future, we will see the Commission acting more aggressively in protecting LGBT and queer rights? And maybe once the Court of EU decides that in the case of Hungary, that it explicitly says that LGBT rights are and part of EU values. Maybe more of a broader question. I'm not sure if anybody wants to take a stab at it. Maybe Mr. Vega.
You kept the easy questions for the end. I think we can all agree that's a very complicated question. A question especially that if we find an answer to it, it's going to be years of negotiation and development. But I think you summed it up quite well. We've seen a lot of developments in that direction. If we have been sitting here in 2014, 2013, even discussing about EU funds being frozen on a broader topic of how we deal with a diverse society would not have been thinkable, I guess, for us. So we've seen a lot of progress on that. We also have to, I think, look at it from another perspective as well. Even though cases like Slovakia and other countries show us that the European Union's influence is limited. The European level can do a lot of good in a lot of countries, especially for the LGBTIQ community. And doing that good is based on having the acceptance and having broad support. And that's a negotiation of different political parties, of member states, of individuals, of activists, of the civil society, more and more, and of media. So I think we always have to keep the balance between how we use those tools, especially how we use funding, to take as many people with us in the nation, in the different member states, for the vision of what we want a diverse European society to look like. And on the other hand, of course, protecting our human rights and our human basics that are not only within the Council of Europe, but also the Fundamental Rights Charter and the different strategies we have on the European level. I think we might, let's see how the court ruling goes out. I think we might see a lot of development there in the next 5 years. And we need that development, but how exactly it's going to end up and what the criteria will be, I'm not good enough in fortune telling for that.
Yes, thank you. I think sometimes we would like it if it was simpler, if we could just say that a country is breaching human rights and it will not get money, but unfortunately it does have to go through all kinds of years-long court proceedings, because obviously the European Union also wants to respect rule of law. But one maybe easier question. So Mr. Matku already spoke about coordinating with other civic society organizations that focus on other minority rights and maybe also the environment. So we have a question about maybe if you could speak more about the plans for this sort of broader alliance, even though obviously they're sort of in the beginnings, and maybe even why do you think that this strategy would work well?
Well, only now we are starting to discuss with the other NGOs what to do the next 4 years. I think it's important because it shows that this works in past. For example, we have this issue about the new legislation about foundation in Slovakia last year. The government tried to amend the legislation in a way that also some private foundation could be established in Slovakia. They even presented it as a way for same-sex couples to somehow manage their property. It was complete nonsense, and it was mostly for it was a way how to avoid the basically anti-corruption measures in legislation, and we managed to establish a broad coalition of NGOs and different foundations, and also some Christian, for example, and the pressure from this coalition really works, and this legislation wasn't adopted. So we think we will establish like more this kind of coalitions of NGOs. We also want to speak with some conservative NGOs, let's say, and we hope we will find some common ground, and hopefully this will prevent at least some changes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We have one question, maybe to more Mr. Savisaal, Mr. Pei. If you can maybe just explain a little bit more, like what your organizations are, who your members are, because we have a question on whether there are any international political party cooperation on LGBT issues or groups where we could group, and how to join. So maybe if we have some members of civic society from Slovakia in the audience that hear that there are maybe some allies in Europe and where they could either join or find help.
Of course, as I mentioned already in the beginning, as Rainbows, we have been since more than a decade bringing together the LGBTIQ organizations in social democratic, labor, and socialist parties all over Europe. That, of course, means we don't have a network or a fixed organization in every member state. Especially in Eastern Europe, it often depends on having activists there, having people affiliated to the party and bringing them together, and this, of course, supporting them. I mean, from Austria, we have a good, well-founded organization within our political party, and we can use those structures to help our comrades, for example, in Hungary, and hopefully even more in the next years in Slovakia. And that's the way we work. We work together, and on working together across party lines, I think we had a great meeting already with the European People's Party Alliance and with the Greens and Forbidden Colors in Malta during Europe Pride about how to work together regarding the next European elections and making human rights for queer people a central topic within the election campaigns and raising awareness for that. So I think especially on the European level, more than on most national levels, we are on a good way for working together at the moment.
Thank you. Maybe same question to Mr. Saarestål.
Yes, thank you. As Ms. Pei mentioned, there is an ongoing cooperation between the different pan-European political LGBT IQ networks. There are, apart from the two of us here, there's also a Green group and, of course, a Liberal group. So there's at least 4 of us that can do things together. The Alliance, as we like to shorten, abbreviate ourselves, the aim of the organization is, of course, to strengthen the LGBT plus voice in the European People's Party, in the different member parties across Europe, but also being someone that can push these issues also politically in different levels and be a voice in the community. Now, currently, we are 12 member organizations from 11 different countries. The latest one to join is Malta, and we're right now working a lot with establishing contacts to grow and expand further. So Greece is very much in our focus right now with the centre-right government of Nea Demokratia, and the fact that they're hosting Europe Pride next year, and the fact that Cyprus has made reforms, which Greece hasn't. So the Greeks need to step up. So we are working right now a lot with them. That means we haven't had any organizations or activists that link to us from countries in Central Europe. We do have some connections in Poland, and hopefully that will materialize into something more serious now with the change of government in Poland as well. But otherwise, I'm going to say that Slovakia and Hungary are countries where we haven't had any people. In Hungary, for obvious reasons, since the government and the party isn't even the EPP anymore, and there is still an EPP party in Hungary, although they are basically controlled by the Fidesz and should probably be suspended as well. Although they keep a very low profile, they never say anything. I think they're there to spy, basically. But anyhow, I think that what we could do is, of course, that we can communicate with EPP leadership and with other political parties and help create a surrounding environment that would put pressure on our member parties from Slovakia and other countries where we see problems.
Yeah, thank you. So we have last 5 minutes, so I just want to give each of you just one last opportunity to maybe highlight some of the things that we talked about, which was most important. Maybe to Mr. Matko, again, just to reiterate, obviously we're entering, especially the LGBTQ communities, entering difficult period where things might become worse for a while. So what do you think you would, or what's your message to the European parties, European Parliament? What do you need? What could help you in the next few years?
Basically we need your help, and it can be in many ways. Of course, the basic one is to pay attention what is happening in Slovakia, and basically to also to start a discussion on the European level about these issues, and also and at the end, we will need some consequences to what is happening here, and also not only for the parties, but also for the country as itself. Fortunately, we are not first in this situation. We already have some experience with Hungary and Poland, so we can build on this experience and do what works also, and so on.
Yes, thank you. Maybe Mr. Pei, just to circle back to Smer, what I heard is that there will be continuing discussions with Smer about and reevaluations of their membership. So if you can maybe speak how you will be still monitoring on and making that decision whether something has changed on their approach to LGBT rights.
I think, as you said, there will be continued discussions with both parties, with SME and with LAS, regarding the position. We already made clear to both our European Party and our members in the European Parliament that we are going to watch them very closely and trying to be involved in them. We're also planning on coming to Slovakia with a delegation to continue these talks. And I think to have a channel of discussion open is important with the parties to create pressure to move forward. But more important for us as Rainbow Rose and for many of our members, both on the European level and international level, is to support the civil society, to support INACOS, to support other NGOs, which we're going to try to focus on over the next months and trying to create contacts there. Because that's our role within the party organization. And for the last sentence, I think I really want to thank the NGOs in Slovakia because the work of highlighting what's going on and what is probably going to happen is important so that we can also have the pressure and the awareness on the European level and continue moving forward. So any support that we can give is, of course, going to be there.
Thank you very much. And maybe floor to Mr. Sauestal for parting words.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thanks for a very interesting discussion. And I really sincerely hope that we together can have a positive impact on the future development, and not only in Slovakia, but many other places in Europe. We will raise the issue about the actions of the EPP parties in Slovakia at the earliest convenient moment, which means the EPP Political Assembly in Brussels next month. So that's where we will again raise this issue. But as I said earlier, I think the road to exclusion is very long, but we are perhaps starting to walk down it when they are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think our time has run out. So I absolutely want to thank you to our participants for discussion, for taking time to answer these questions. I also want to thank you to our audience for raising these questions. And obviously, I want to thank to Heinrich Böll Stiftung and their office in Prague and Katarzyna for facilitating this discussion. For Euractiv Slovakia, we'll be following the LGBT issues on our website. We also every day we write to Brussels in their newsletter Capital. So whenever something controversial happens with our politicians, you can read about it there. So maybe that can help you with following what's going on. We'll try to ring the bells and be little watchdogs ourselves. But that will be all for me. Again, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.